Thank you, Chairwoman and members of the committee. Long night. There's a lot of long nights in this committee, so thank you for your time and commitment, and thanks for all the efforts to work here so late as well. To be very honest, the resolution before you this evening is not one that I think would be appropriate to introduce in normal times. But as many of you know by now, I, along with a whole lot of people in this country, feel very strongly that these are not normal times. This is an exceedingly dangerous moment in our country's history. And I would argue that what is inappropriate right now is for us to behave as if it's not. I introduced this resolution because we have a president who has consistently threatened the independence of the judiciary, who is currently under investigation for possible collusion with Russia regarding election interference, whose use of racism in this last election led to the official endorsement by the KKK and led to a literal spike in the number of hate crimes committed in this country. That's really scary to me. It's scary to a lot of our constituents. I know it's scary to many of you on the committee. What this resolution does is urge us to stop and think. The good news is that the president doesn't operate in a vacuum. Every order that comes out of the administration, there are a whole lot of public officials, elected folks like us, bureaucrats, service members, members of the judiciary, who are responsible for implementing that order. And what this resolution does is urge all of those people and all of us to carefully consider the constitutionality, the legitimacy, and the morality of those orders that come out of D.C. I think it's fair to say that since the end of World War II, we've sort of agreed as a human civilization that I was just following orders does not cut it as a sufficient reason or justification for taking deeply immoral actions. Now, obviously, morality is subjective. This resolution doesn't get into what is moral or not. What it says is we should think about that. We should keep that in mind. We should be carefully considering the constitutionality, the legitimacy, and the morality of the orders we get before we follow the orders. I think that, from my perspective, one of the things that makes our country special, that has elevated this nation since our founding, is the idea that the moral responsibility for upholding the fundamental principles and rights and protections of this country is a responsibility shared by all of us in society. That's an idea that has made America great, and I think it's worth reiterating and reaffirming through a resolution like this and through everything else that we do in our public capacity. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Are there questions for response? Representative Aaron.
I think Mr. Price was... Okay. I'm glad you raised the Nuremberg principles because they are applicable. Just following orders is not defense. I'm more concerned about the whereas clause because we assert facts throughout them. And I want to be very careful. We should always be careful about asserting what is fact and what isn't fact. And so I would like to go through a couple of them and ask you why they are fact, or if they're more of an opinion. And if they're more of an opinion, whether it's appropriate for the body to adopt them. The first would be in the third whereas, about voter suppression measures in North Carolina, Florida, and Wisconsin. I'm just curious, what were those voter suppression issues? And has it been proven, or is it more of an opinion?
Well, first of all, as far as fact, it says may have been a determining factor. Certainly there is a lot of...
It says voter suppression, as if that is fact. And then it says may have affected the election. It doesn't say there may have been voter suppression. It says voter suppression is there as a fact. I'd like to know what those facts are.
Good point. There have been a number of analyses that I'd be happy to send you, I don't have any on hand, of the impact of attempts by Republican majorities, state legislative majorities in a number of states to change voting laws through voter ID, through
So we have voter ID. We have voter ID in the state. Is that voter suppression? Have voter ID?
I would argue that it certainly is. Obviously, the voter ID policy that we have in Rhode Island is significantly less onerous than it is in the states that are listed. But I would argue, sure, I've received calls from voters who were not able to vote, who did not vote because of our current voter ID law, which is the least onerous, I think, of any in the country.
Okay, so voter ID in North Carolina, Florida, and Wisconsin.
There's been evidence that's come out, particularly I believe, in North Carolina, about the process by which they made decisions around some of the election law changes that were made. That made clear that in the private deliberations, certainly the people who were designing those laws were intending them for the use of voter suppression to make sure that particular communities had a hard time voting. So I'm happy to send you what I would argue is a substantial amount of evidence that statement is based on. That the final deliberation, you might still argue that's subjective, and I don't agree with that, but I think there's a lot of hard evidence out there.
I just mean, if we assert fact, we have substantial evidence, absent an indictment, absent someone being charged or convicted, I think we have to be careful on what we assert is fact and what's opinion. So I'd like to
appreciate that.
Thank you. The next paragraph says the electoral interference of Russia. You hear all types of different things. What are you referring to? What Russia? I hear tons of things. What Russia's role was, and I don't know what you mean. What specifically are you asserting here as that?
I think the things that people are talking about, the things you're hearing, are related to one, the specific hacking that took place and the specific focus of that hacking.
The hacking was of the DNC?
Yeah.
And do we know that was Russia, or was it kind of proven?
Clearly there are investigations ongoing. Clearly there are a ton of national security experts who believe very strongly that Russia was behind that. And you'll be hearing the conversations that you're hearing with regard to that. And there's been evidence of the hiring of Russian state employees to engage in particular internet strategies.
Was the hacking with the DNC, were those emails that proved or showed that the DNC was colluding with the Clinton campaign to deny Bernie Sanders a fair shot in the Democrat primary? Those some of them?
Those are the emails that came out in the lead up to the general election.
2 paragraphs down.
And again, just to point out, there's a FBI investigation into the Trump campaign's potential coordination, interface, collusion with Russia in that action.
And the 2 words you raise at your point, investigation and potential. We don't know what that investigation is going to find. Potential, we're asserting facts here. I think we always need to be very careful on what we assert as fact and what we assert as opinion, especially in a resolution of this nature. That being said, the two paragraphs down, the business conflicts of the Trump organization are a clear violation of the emoluments clause. I can pronounce that better than I have much experience with it. My understanding is that that's gifts from foreign governments. Am I correct? The emoluments clause. So what gifts from foreign governments have occurred?
Again, I think that there's a lot of legal scholars with a great deal more expertise in this than you or I, who have raised very serious concerns with Donald Trump's business interests, with his refusal to completely divorce himself in a blind trust kind of way with those business interests, which are spread around the globe, which have clear, which foreign governments have clear, could have a clear stake in treating differently based on behavior from the government of the United States of America.
And you said a key
And,
word.
and by the way, clearly unprecedented. Right? I think, can we agree that it is
Clearly
unprecedented?
But you said a key word, it was could. Like, there could be a conflict, there could be a violation. We just don't know. Next two paragraphs down. Trump regime continues to use the office of presidency to illegally promote private profit of the Trump brands and intimidate private companies. What are the facts behind that assertion?
I think there have been a number of documented cases. A senior administration official was on live TV promoting the brand of the president's daughter. He has been clearly engaging in the ways, the president's been clearly engaging in the ways he does on social media, attacking certain companies for their engagement with his brand. So that's what that's about.
And the next one, disregard the constitutional separation of powers that threatens the independence of the judiciary. And what's the basis for that assertion?
The basis for that would be the many statements we've heard targeting members of the judiciary for their legal rulings in regards to his.
But that's normal. I mean, I remember when President Obama gave his State of the Union address after Citizens United. You know, he questioned the legal reasoning of the judiciary from the House chamber. Is that interference with separation of powers by questioning the rulings of the judiciary? Or is he referring?
So you would argue that President Trump's statements about particular judiciary leaders is that's normal. That's a standard precedent for how members of the executive engage with members of the judiciary.
I think all of us disagree with judicial decisions all the time.
We sure do.
We should. And we're saying the president can't disagree with the judicial decision.
We're not talking on this about disagreeing with the judicial decision. We're talking about statements the president's made calling into question the legitimacy of that member of the judiciary.
And when was that? Was that in the campaign or was that as president?
That was as president. There have been a number of statements following stays and decisions of the immigration and Muslim ban that were pretty direct statements. Again, on all these questions, I did not come prepared with a large amount of documentation, so I'm working off my right now, but I'm happy to gather that documentation and share it.
So he questioned the legitimacy of the person issuing the decision, not the legitimacy of the decision itself. That's what this is saying.
Absolutely.
So he questioned the legitimacy of the judicial official making that decision. Because if he did, I think you got a point. But if he questioned the legitimacy of the decision, then I don't think.
I think that's a fair point, and I would argue that absolutely the legitimacy of the judiciary member was questioned. My memory could be wrong. I'm happy to when we have a little time, pull up the things that I've been referring to.
And what was the basis of that? He said the person wasn't properly appointed as a judge.
Do you want me to
Well, I mean, you're asking us to assert facts, and I'm just concerned about us voting to adopt a resolution with a factual basis for the whereas clause, which are critical, aren't clear. You know, it's conclusory statement after conclusory statement, and no recitation of the facts which would lead any rational person to make that conclusion.
I think that's a fair point. Since the committee won't be voting on this tonight, and this is a hearing, I'm happy to spend some time gathering the citations and the evidence for each of these claims, going over with them with you if you're interested.
I'd love to.
And maybe amending this language with all of those specifics so that we can all be efficient on the facts of the cases.
Yeah, I think that's really important for a resolution, just we're stating specific facts. We need to know that those are facts and not conjecture or opinion or partisan conclusions. I think it's just really important this body is, if we're going to do something like this, especially given the gravity of the resolved clause, is really to be very sure that what we're saying is true. Because the last thing I think anyone in this body wants is for us to be wrong and to get egg on the face of this body. I think that would be extremely regrettable. And I just want to be certain that what we're saying is true before we say it.
Yep. I feel pretty confident about all of the things we just discussed. Again, I apologize for not having more documentation here, but I look forward to gathering it and huddling with you.
Yeah, I really want to look at it. I really do. Because the things you're stating here, I'm like, wow, if this is true, I want to know. But I don't know that it is, and I have to see solid evidence before I can ever vote on a resolution that makes such conclusions. I think we got to back up the facts. So, I'm fine. Thank you, sir, very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Price.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I think Representative Filippi hit on most everything I was going to hit on, but I think that the issue that I have with this resolution is that I think that making unsubstantiated claims against our 45th President, Donald J. Trump, in a resolution from the Rhode Island State House is I think it's I don't think it's good. I think it's very dangerous, and it could be embarrassing to our state unless these things can be absolutely 100% confirmed. As far as the Russia thing goes, as far as I know, there's been absolutely, the DNC's emails were hacked, and we're talking about Russia. We're not talking about the contents of the emails, which is what, in my opinion, we should be talking about, because even if they were hacked by Russia, still the contents is what we should be talking about. And and then going back to the Senate floor, going back to Russia, John McCain has now declared that Rand Paul is working for Vladimir Putin. So should we add him to the resolution for Russian collusion now that John McCain has done that?
I would argue no. The FBI of the United States of America hasn't said there's enough evidence here for us to take this seriously enough to do an actual, as far as I can tell, unprecedented investigation of the administration. So I would argue that we don't need to add it, but I'm happy to discuss it with you.
Well, I'm just saying that, that they could claim anybody works for Russia. They could claim I work for Russia because I've mentioned Russia or I had Russian salad dressing. But my question to you is, do you think it's proper to even present a resolution of unsubstantiated claims against our current 45th President of the United States of America?
Again, I'm happy to
just yes or no would be
bring
fine.
the
Yes or no would be fine.
I think that the idea of urging folks in this time with a president who I would argue is not normal and who poses a very real threat to our republic, that is a resolution urging folks to think carefully, to consider the constitutionality and the morality of their actions is absolutely appropriate.
I have a few things I'd like to read from the committee. It's President Trump's first 50 days in office, his achievements, if I could.
All right.
Maybe submit it as written testimony.
Why don't you submit it as written
Fair enough.
testimony?
Fair enough.
Could you tell us what source you have for this information?
This source is the White House briefing room, right off the White House website.
Thank you.
Why is that funny? You don't trust the White House.
Well,
It's whitehouse.com.
the other litigator's back, isn't that what you accused Aaron of coming up with?
So what you're saying is that our administration is
Let's
lying?
go through the chairs.
Is that-
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Rep. Price, I'd be happy to put together a well-documented, substantiated list of the ways and instances that this administration has done it. Yes.
I'm sure you could.
copy.
Accurate and appropriate.
Excuse me, for the chair, please.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
The committee will take into its file on this legislation, this resolution, information from the sponsor, information from anyone else who would like to submit, including Representative Price, your information from the web.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Wilkinson, has Fellow Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, first of all, I want to thank you for encouraging people to consider what is being put out before they go forth and take action. There are a couple of concerns that I have with regards to some of the language that you have in here. When you talk about immigration officials or regulatory officials, you're talking about the civilian community where the individual at the worst case scenario would be fired. When you do not say to the military to consider, but you're saying to refuse to engage in violent repression of U.S. citizens and residents engaged in peaceful demonstrations, protests, so forth and so on, encouraging the military member to engage in that action by refusing would put that military member potentially at Fort Leavenworth. It would be, he or she would be the subject of a court-martial, that is a federal court. They would have a record as a result of that. You have to keep in mind, sir, that whether or not you like the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and with it, when a person puts on the uniform, they temporarily have their civil rights suspended. So they're not in a position where they could just decide to go along their political or their moral teachings. They have to follow orders with full understanding of what Representative said. There's a big difference between saying to civilians, carefully consider, and saying to the military, you must refuse. Now, if it is the repression of U.S. citizens, then I'm assuming that you realize that that would be National Guard members, that would not be active duty military service members. The Guard force is activated into the Army and the Air Force once they are deployed overseas. That's what happens in Iraq and Afghanistan. You also probably know that Rhode Island has the second largest number of military members that is deployed overseas. The second largest in the nation. So if you want anyone to resist that is wearing a military uniform, my recommendation is that you put in your resolution that you encourage the governor to not deploy the National Guard or the Guard force with regards to suppressing any type of First Amendment rights within the state of Rhode Island. But again, this, and while I understand where you're coming from, as a retired military officer, there's no way in God's green earth that I would ever say to another military member that you have to follow your own political teachings and find yourselves in Leavenworth. You're not going to go visit him, and I'm sure it's not going to Kansas to visit him either. And to me, it puts an undue burden on the military members when you're telling all of these other civilians, you could just consider. With the military people, you're giving them a call of action, and that's patently unfair. You're putting too much on the military. Put it on the governor. She's the one that's the commander-in-chief of the state of Rhode Island, and she has that title. Okay? You understand where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I deeply appreciate what you're saying and that perspective. Your boundless advocacy for your comrades in uniform. I guess I would love to just get a better sense from you. So the language is refuse to engage in violent repression of U.S. citizens and residents engaged in peaceful demonstrations?
Yes, if you want that to happen, then my recommendation to you would be resolved that the governor of the state of Rhode Island would refuse to embark the Guard force in the suppression of. Because in the state, the four corners of Rhode Island, or however many corners we have in the state, it is the governor who is the commander-in-chief. It is the governor who decides what happens to the Guard Force, the Air Guard and the National Guard, within the boundaries of Rhode Island. When those men and women are deployed, they're no longer part of the National Guard. They are now reservists with the full-time military under Title 35. Apples and oranges, okay? And we do not have the right to tell the active duty Navy that is part of the Department of Defense in Newport what they can and cannot do if they're being deployed. We don't have that authority. So, we just don't. The only people that we would potentially be able to influence, again, would be the National Guard members that are here, men and women who are in the Guard Force, and that would go under the jurisdiction of the governor, because she is their commander-in-chief. Much in the same way that President Trump is the commander-in-chief of the active duty military. See what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
So if you want, I'm happy to work on that language with you, okay? So that I understand your passion, that you want something in here that talks about not engaging in in suppressing the First Amendment rights of our citizens in Rhode Island, but that direction needs to go to the governor, not to the individual military members. She's their commander-in-chief.
So, I understand what you're saying. I'd love to work with you. I would respond by saying, as with all resolutions versus legislation, one could say that this is a symbolic statement. It's not a force of law requiring that someone does one thing or the other. It is a statement of values. It is urging folks to take certain actions or considerations, and I would argue that it is appropriate to urge service members to not engage in violent repression of U.S. citizens who are engaged in peaceful demonstrations. I think that's a value that we hold really dear in this country, and a statement that reaffirming that value. I want to talk more, and I'm open to what you're saying. As I hear it now, though, that doesn't strike me as an undue burden.
Active duty military would never be deployed when it comes to the boundaries of the United States. That's just not what our mission is. And all of the military, active or Guard Force, are required to take an oath. Unlike the civilians that you're also directing this resolution to. Again, I see it as an undue burden because the military person who follows this while they're wearing a uniform can find themselves in a military prison. Not at the ACI, but at federal prison. They can. They can. And I just don't feel that it would be fair for you to put that burden on people in uniform when everyone else can just consider. And you say it several times in here, carefully consider the legitimacy, carefully consider. I mean, even with regards to, in line 13, where you say, urging all regulatory officials to avoid suppressing necessary information, to avoid it. You're not saying to them, don't do it. But you're being very direct with the military rep, and that's not right. And I'll tell you that, for me, I can't speak for any other military that's in the House or in the Senate, but for me, having retired from the United States Navy, having taken an oath, there's no way that I would support this. Not only would I not support it, but I would have to speak to the military that I'm in touch with to say to them, is this something that you want your representatives to encourage the veterans in your community to do? I'm trying to help you here.
Yeah, I
I'm not
appreciate
trying
that.
to be a hard ass, but I will do whatever I have to protect the veterans. That's just the way it is.
And I'll say that it certainly was not the intention in this to have more of a burden on folks in uniform than civilians, and so definitely would be interested in working with you to figure out the language so that there is
The governor's got the authority.
an equal urging and an equal burden.
The governor has the authority. She has the ability to deploy the Guard Force if there's any type of demonstration that is no longer peaceful. That's her call, all right? So I think that she should be in here as well. to be honest with you. She's there because she is their commander-in-chief for the people that are here, for the Army Guard and Air Guard, who would potentially be deployed at her order. I'll work with you on that.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Thank you, Rep.
Maybe a suggestion, Mr. Chair, if I could add one, please.
Yeah, I think Representative Coughlin had a question.
It's just on this point.
You've got
It's, maybe if we put language in there that would urge our congressional delegation to not entertain any attempts to repeal posse comitatus. And I think that's maybe the issue as the 19th century law, which prevents active duty military from having operations involving civilians on U.S. soil. That seems that maybe would make more sense, because right now active duty military legally can't involve itself with the domestic population. So I would just suggest that, maybe get language in there about posse comitatus.
That still doesn't take care of the National Guard, which is why I would say put it to the governor. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Price? Representative Coughlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make this very brief, Mr. Chairman. You got a giggles case today. Anyway, I'll try to be brief. So this doesn't turn into a Republican versus Democrat debate right now. I am sharing the same frustration with this document tonight that my colleague, Representative Philippi, is sharing with it, and that I understand Representative Regunberg that this may be a symbolic and an aspirational document, but I'm having trouble myself with these whereas paragraphs that say something may have happened, could have happened, speculates about whether it happened. And I think before I could jump personally to the resolution, the resolved paragraphs, I would have to see something a lot more concrete and definite supporting the whereas. And even talking about the North Carolina or the other states' laws. Well, they created their laws, and it was in their sovereignty to create their own code of laws, and they have not been challenged in the courts. And I'm not sure I can support this notion that total suppression took place legally. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm looking for the same type of documentation that Representative Philippi is, and I'm also sharing the same reservations about the use of our military and state government resolving and suggesting that the U.S. military do something contrary to their own policy and regulations. So I'd like to see some support out of all of this from you, with all due respect.
I will be working hard to put that all together, and I'll email the whole committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Price?
Thanks for the offer, but I think I'm
Okay.
done, thank you.
Representative Jello told me you had a question earlier.
Oh, yes, well, thank you. It was answered, thank you.
Anyone else? Representative Aaron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're like taking this stronger. I mean, I know Aaron is very strong in his opinion on this, but this is not a directive. This is an opinion. He's urging the rest of us, if we so choose to vote, to join in on this resolution. But even at its worst case, if we were to, which I tend to doubt it will get that far, but it's still not a directive of any kind. It's just, it reminds me back in the days of the Vietnam War where, you know, people had different thoughts about whether or not to go, and many people, civil disobedience, they dodged the draft, went to Canada. I mean, this is, you know, we're not that far away from this in this country to some people right now. So I think that's what Aaron is just representing, a certain group of people that strongly feel this way, and you know, some of what he says is pretty on the right on. I mean, you know, the electoral interference of Russia may have been a determining factor. We don't even know that yet. We don't know. But it's still being investigated.
So why would we put it in a resolution?
But since
Hang on.
well, and James Comey, I mean, that was pretty unprecedented that the FBI, director of the FBI comes out 2 weeks before the election. I mean, it's, you know, but I don't think he's directing the military to say, don't abide by whatever your commander is. He's urging
I think more of a rethink of stuff. And I mean, we may get to that point where people don't want to join the military anymore. I think we're already there, but before Trump even became president. So, because of some of the wars that we're in. But I don't see the language as strong as some of you all feel. I mean, maybe you agree with 3 or 4 things, but not 6 or 7. So that's where we're all going to disagree on this. I think that's going to be a common problem. But
I appreciate that, Rep. And just to be clear, like, from my perspective, the findings, the whereases, are not the important part of this. I look forward to working on that with you. But again, just to bring it back to what this is about, there were reports following the, for all intents and purposes, Muslim ban, executive order by the Trump administration, of officials in implementing and executing that order at airports, doing things that I think we would say in the light of day are pretty crazy. There was reported handcuffing someone, a 5-year-old, for hours and hours at a time, of a woman not being elected, who was the parent of American citizens, was just coming through the airport and was detained without food and water for over 24 hours. Things that, again, I think in the light of day, when we think about them, we would agree that that's not a moral or legitimate or a constitutional act. And people were doing them because they had orders to. And so I think the idea of this, again, is that we're urging people to be thoughtful and to really think about the things that come out, the things that they're ordered to do, so that to try to be clear that when you see something, when you're thinking about it the day after the light of day, should that person have been handcuffed for 24 hours in that position, that we can cut that off before it happens.
Anyone else? Committees are to receive testimony and ask questions of people, and I've been very liberal with letting people espouse their ideas, but this, we're here to take testimony from people, so let's do some of that, okay?